Welcome to LOA Today. I'm Walt Thiessen. I've been doing this podcast since September of 2012, and boy, are my lips tired. This is your daily dose of happy. We are so happy you decided to join us today. And our friend Anne-Marie is dealing with the weather today. They've got some severe weather going on where she is in the UK, and her internet is out, so we will look forward to hearing from her next week when everything is all balanced out. But I am joined today by Krista Melanson, who is one of the most unusual guests we've had in a long time because she has two very distinct skill sets that she manages to merge together. And I'm going to be really curious to see how she does that. First, she is a cordon bleu trained chef, which is, I mean, when was the last time we had a chef on the show? And then she's a relationship expert. Like, okay, this is going to be interesting. So, Krista, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Thanks, Walt. It's really nice to be here. I'm doing great and looking forward to talking about all the things.
Yeah. So, all right. I mean, I'm not going to keep everybody in suspense. You got to clue us in. Like, how on earth did you marry these two concepts together? Because this is not like it's not a natural thing. I think I'm going to be a chef and I'm going to be a relationship counselor. It's like, no, it doesn't usually play that way.
No, not usually. Cooking has always been a passion of mine. Ever since I was a little kid, my mom was an amazing cook and she made, wonderful meals and dinner parties and all sorts of things. And she said I was always under her feet. So she thought she may as well put it to something useful and taught me to cook. So I definitely learned my passion for cooking with her. And then, my dad was an actuary, and we sort of had decided that Krista was going to be an actuary when she graduated from high school. Mm-hmm. And then I realized I just didn't like math or statistics. So that was
not a good combination.
Just not going to work. And I was working for a small catering business in my area, and I loved it. And so I said, you know what? This is what I'd like to do. And my dad, who, indulge sounds wrong. He encouraged my every idea or direction. And I wasn't sure what he'd think about it, but he said, this sounds wonderful. Go ahead and do it. So I went to school and I really enjoyed being there in Paris. It was an amazing experience. And I came home and I worked for quite a few years. And then it was time to have a family. And I couldn't imagine myself being pregnant, standing behind 8 burners and, managing frying pans and everything. So I sort of went into sales. And I didn't love sales. I was really good at it because it was food service sales. And I never went to a restaurant and tried to sell them something that wasn't right for them. But it just wasn't, I didn't love it. And so I went to work for an airline, loved working for an airline, but then COVID came.
Yes.
Yeah. And so then during COVID, I had to find a new direction and find something else to do. And so I started with the relationship coaching because it was just thing that, I always enjoyed talking to people and helping people and, imparting those bits of wisdom on top of, the common sense things, because relationships are so much common sense plus emotions, right? And I really like doing that. Right, exactly, right? And then somebody said I actually had a business coach, and she said, you're missing something obvious. And I said, what? And she said, you need to use your cooking. And I'm like, but how? And then I started thinking, and I thought, yeah, you know what? I can do something with this, because food for me is very much a love language. And being in the kitchen with somebody is, it's teamwork and it's fun. And so, yeah, so that was where it all went. That was sort of a long, circuitous route to get to where I am now and why I'm here. But
well, I wouldn't expect anything else. This, like we said, this is not something that is a natural marriage. Relationships, cordon bleu, it doesn't normally go together. So it would have to be a circuitous route to get there. That actually seemed fairly straightforward compared to what it could have been, to be perfectly honest.
There you go.
That was pretty straight.
So, yeah, I think it's It's really, to me, like once I came up with the idea and once the idea sort of started to germinate, then the more I thought about it, the more I thought, you know what, this works. This is a more natural fit than people would think. Maybe an unusual combination to put together, but probably peanut butter and jam was at some point, right?
Well, it could be. I don't really know. But I do know that this is a little bit unusual. So give us a clue about how it actually does tie together. I mean, when you're working with people, how do you combine the one with the other?
Well, I encourage couples to spend time together and spend quality time. And so often we get caught up in life, right? And it's like we've got the kids and we've got jobs and the house and all these things, and you put your relationship aside because, you know, it's fine, we'll always be together once the kids are older or whatever, then we'll get back on track. But I think that people ignore or discount the idea that parents who are happy and filled with adult time are better parents. And I think it just makes us a more rounded person. So I encourage couples to, you know, not walk in the house and the first thing you do is you get on your phone and, you know, it's hi, how are you? How's your day? And it's very, you know, surface level. And I think that when people make the effort to put time aside to have a date night, whether it's once a month at the least, or once every 2 weeks or once a week, then it's so much fun to get that conversation going. And I think that the kitchen is a great way to do it because A, you don't need to leave the house. And B, you know, when you're cooking together, it can be passionate, but it can be passionate in sort of a, you know, individual personalities thing. But it's a way to connect and learn to work together as a team. And, you know, if you are really good at cutting up meat and I prefer vegetables, then switch role and, you know, learn a little bit of the other person's strength and spread the work out a little bit. And I always give people conversation topics for each class, you know, to talk about a variety of different things, you know, things that maybe you haven't talked about. You know, have you ever pretended to be allergic to something because you didn't like eating it or whatever, right? I try to make them tie in food related conversation, but just it's a way to get the conversation going. But it's also always good to add a new recipe to your repertoire, learn a couple new skills, right? So it's kind of sneaky communication
Sneaky.
and connection.
I like that word, sneaky. Yeah. I'm currently divorced, but when I was married, I used to be sous chef to my ex. She would take the lead in the kitchen each time. Interestingly enough, we didn't actually do a lot of talking in the kitchen. We do the talking afterward, mainly because her main goal was to get out of the kitchen as soon as possible. But that kind of runs counter to what you're saying.
Well, and that's one of my big things is that cooking doesn't have to be a chore. You can make it into something that's fun that you can do together. And, you know, I cook dinner every day and I can do it without giving it a lot of thought because it's what I do. And so, you know, it's not difficult for me, but it is still very much a chore sometimes. But when I tell my partner, I say, put your apron on, you're cooking dinner with me tonight. It's not because I don't want to do the duty or do all the work. It's because I want to share that time. So he comes in and, you know, we talk about things and we, you know, often if something goes wrong, that's the most enjoyable part of it, right? Because you can laugh about it. And it's just kind of fun being there. And he likes when I invite him into the kitchen because he has kind of a stressful job. And he says it takes his mind off of what was going on at work, and you know, he can focus on me and our time in the kitchen, and then at the end of it we have an amazing meal.
Yeah, I'm totally on board with that, just because I learned a few years back the value of cleanup. Nothing like washing the dishes and it takes stress out. I mean, because it's such a mindless task that it's almost impossible to stress over dishes. I mean, it's not totally impossible, but you have to work at it.
Right. Well, I can be a bit of a bull in a china shop, so dishes can be stressful for me if I have to do like expensive wine glasses.
Okay, all right, sure, I'll get that. Yeah, but I
Right.
mean,
But that's
that's
about
not
it.
like
You're right. I mean,
every day, you know. Unless you're
no, I'm
drinking
not going to
expensive
lose
wine every
sleep
day. I don't know.
over.
Maybe that's your palate. I don't know. But
Right. Not that there's anything wrong with that. But yeah, it's nobody stresses over how clean your spoon is, right?
not really. No, no. Yeah, which is an interesting thing. Kind of, it's almost like it's a misplaced attention, isn't it? Because we should be paying more attention to that.
Well, yeah, you should, but I think you're right. It's kind of like drudgery, and your mind doesn't stress, and it's just kind of release, and you can be doing something else in your mind while you're doing it. So it can be quite relaxing in some ways.
Hmm. Oh yeah, I know that for myself. Like I said, cleanup is it's such a mindless thing that I find is a great way to not only de-stress. It's actually one of the three-step process that I use if I really really need to get myself into a more relaxed state to almost use it like a meditation. And when I approach it that way, when I treat it as that first of three steps, I can't remember what the three-step process is anymore. But a first step is the cleanup. Second step is a meditative step, and then the third step, I don't remember what the third one is. I never really get there anymore. but but normally I don't have to, and the reason I don't have to is because it's a very effective way to just shift the vibration, shift the way I'm feeling about stuff, and then take a breath. And when I'm taking that breath, by the time I'm taking the breath, it means I've already gone through my relaxation phase by doing the cleanup. I see Krista's kind of reconnecting. Are you connected? Okay, I wasn't sure what was happening there. Yes, she is. Okay, good. So while she's reconnecting, a couple things I want to share with you. First of all, we've got the show with Joel coming up later on today because I record twice on Mondays. That one's going to be an interesting conversation because we're going to be talking about the importance of focusing on what is important to you in your life, which of course is something we talk about a lot. Okay, Krista's reconnecting now, and the picture looks better. And I think when she unmutes, it's going to all be really, really good. So let's see, earbuds in. Well, like I was saying, while we're waiting for Krista to try to figure out how to reconnect there, um, the conversation I'm going to have with Joel later on is on the idea of rewriting your story, and how important it is to visit that on a regular daily basis. So you'll want to check into that episode, which will be coming up right after this one in terms of what shows up in your feed. The main reason I want you to focus on that one is that episode is about a that we really need to visit on a regular basis. All of us, the more that we spend time on retelling our story, the better. So, by all means, do that. Oh, I hear sound coming from Krista now. I think
I'm
we're
on my
back.
phone now.
Oh, okay. We switched devices. Good plan. Yeah, if one
Yeah.
device doesn't work, you just go to a different device.
Yeah.
I love it. Okay, so let's
Sorry
see.
about
Where were
that.
we?
I have no idea what was going on there.
Not sure, but whatever it was, it's in the past, and that's the main thing.
Hmm.
And by the way, this is not abnormal on this show. Just want you to
Okay.
want you to know this is you. You didn't like break any taboo rules or something like that. We build up so much energy on this show. We actually adversely affect electronics, so
I love
not,
that.
not
That's
unusual. So you were talking about the power of working in the kitchen. I had mentioned how I get that benefit from doing cleanup, and then that's when the technology decided to take a hike. So let's
right.
see if we can get back to that point again.
Definitely.
But you were starting to comment on how I think you were trying to say that the activity of interacting in the kitchen was really what was driving you. Maybe I was misunderstanding what you were saying, but it sounded like it's what you were driving at.
Oh yeah, it is. I mean, it's the interaction and creating something that is powerful in the kitchen, right? And food is, and it's being intentional too. I mean, I should say that, right? You can walk through the grocery store and not even remember being in there, but you've got everything you need. And I want to suggest that in order to make dinner less of a chore and more of a bonding moment, that you're going into the kitchen with the intention of connecting and having a moment and creating that time together, right?
Mhm.
And wanting to make it something special as opposed to just dinner.
All right.
So when it's a date night, I mean, you're not going to make craft dinner. You're going to make something that's a little more special, a little more intricate because there's more involved in the process to get to that meal that's at the end of it.
Yeah, sure, and that makes total sense. It's also something that would be easy to overlook, though, because I think probably for many people, the solution is instead of trying to make a really great dinner together, you take her out to dinner, you give her the day off, and you go find a nice restaurant someplace. But that doesn't really achieve the same effect you're talking about.
No, because when you go to a restaurant, and going to a restaurant is lovely and it is a night off for sure. But when you're in a restaurant, you're sitting at a table with 100 of your closest friends surrounding
Yeah,
you.
right.
And it's not an intimate moment, right? You keep your voices low. There's certain things you won't talk about. And I mean, I'm a big advocate of a kiss and a squeeze here and there while you're cooking in the kitchen. And you don't
Mhm.
tend to do that when you're out to dinner, right? So it really is in the privacy of your home, you're having a more intimate interaction, regardless of what it is. And I just think that that's nice. Going out to dinner is lovely, but um, for years with my ex-husband, I used to do this. We didn't have a lot of money. And, we had kids, and babysitters were increasingly difficult to find. So when the kids went to bed, we would do a date night. Um, he was never actually all that keen on it. So maybe that's why we're divorced now, but I always did. But I'd pick something special, right? And I'd say, okay, let's maybe tonight I'll make your favorite hors d'oeuvres, or tonight we'll do Vietnamese food or whatever. And so it was more of an intricate and a special meal that wasn't done every day. And that's how, I think you turn it from the ordinary into something special.
Hmm.
And, you know, you can go to a movie with your partner or watch a movie with your partner, but again, it's not the same as doing something where you're interacting, because if the whole idea of a movie is to be quiet and not talk during the movie, right?
Mhm.
So I think that the cooking, if you go with the intention of making it an event or something, a date that you're doing together, I think it brings a whole different energy into the meal and the cooking.
Yeah, I think there's some truth to that. It also occurs to me, I I became divorced about a year and a half ago, and so for the first time in over 23 years, I was doing all my own cooking every day, and I ended up doing something that I didn't do during the marriage. I ended up becoming more experimental, and I
Right.
asked myself, why was I willing to experiment when I wasn't in a relationship? And I think the answer is I didn't want to impose my experiment on somebody else.
Yep, definitely. And safety, you don't have to worry about experimenting and somebody says, "Oh, that was terrible."
Right? Yeah.
Right? You
Yeah.
can tell
You don't want to do
yourself
that.
it's
It doesn't feel
terrible, but
good.
it doesn't hurt. But it's true, right? You don't, it's a lack of confidence in your ability. And that's another fun side effect of the cooking classes, is that you are honing your ability while you're doing it. And for me, the primary thing is the date night and the connecting, but
Hmm.
very much doing it through learning this new skill. And at the end of it, like I said in the beginning, you've got new recipes, you've got some new skills, and these are things that can carry on. And before you know it, you'll be cooking together all the time.
Okay. Yeah. Now, there is kind of an implied idea in there that we haven't touched on, which is you both actually have to enjoy cooking.
Oh, I think we can do it when people don't enjoy cooking. I think there's still the potential. Again, it's coming in with an open mind and the right intention, right? And I think a lot of people, I don't know many people, and I'm sure there are people out there, but I don't know many people who are really good in the kitchen and don't like it. Most people find it a little cathartic, a little creative. And I think that people who don't love cooking, it partly, not always, but partly comes from their lack of confidence in their cooking skills,
Mhm.
and the inability to create something different and unusual. And normally I have found with couples, if one or both of them are not keen on cooking, they end up having fun because they're really pleased with what comes out at the end of it.
It's an interesting way of looking at it. I know in my own case, I tend to, like I said, not experiment when I was in relationship, and now that I'm on my own, I tend to experiment more. Do I like it more as a result? I don't know. I certainly eat well enough, so it can't be that I dislike it. It can't be that I just totally averse to it. Otherwise, I'd be ordering out every day.
Yeah.
Um, but I'm not sure that I really like it. So that I'm kind of on the fence with what you're saying there.
So, well, and then the $1 million question is, if you find yourself in another relationship, will you cook with your new partner?
It actually came up in conversation. There was somebody I met recently who it actually didn't work out with her, but we were doing pretty well for the first few dates there. And when it came out that I did my own cooking and I was fairly good at it, she was so excited about that because she doesn't and she isn't. And
Right.
so she thought, okay, that was going to be like her get out of jail free card. So not really kind of what you're talking about. More what you're talking about is more of a collaborative thing.
Right.
I kind of get the impression, just from my own experience, that you really need two people who are willing to collaborate. There has to be some desire to collaborate in the first place in the kitchen.
That there absolutely has to be a desire to collaborate. And I think, and again, not everybody, you can't ever paint everyone with the same brush.
Right.
But I think that if you're committed to your partner and you love your partner, excuse me, and they suggest cooking together, I think that somebody who wants to connect and wants the relationship to be strong probably won't say no, I'm not going to do it. you know I mean, and I there are
Mhm.
people who will do that, but I mean, cooking is not, you're not asking them to skydive. You're asking them to come into the kitchen and cook something together. And um you know if it's with me, then it's with a program and everything's planned and somebody's guiding you. And I think that, I like, again, I said, I could be wrong, but I think most people who are willing and committed will be willing to try it out, and usually surprised at how much they enjoy it.
Now, I'm thinking back to my marriage, and I'm thinking about the situation, the circumstances when we would be cooking together. And like I said, for the most part, I would play sous chef to her,
Hmm.
um, because that was really the way she wanted to do it. But I also can say that she didn't really love cooking any more than I did. So it was, I kind of get the sense that we stuck with that pattern because it was the safe pattern.
Hmm.
And that neither one of us were kind of in a mindset that said, well, let's see if we can branch out a bit here. That was probably more than either one of us wanted to be able to handle. So when I
Yeah.
think about collaboration, that's what I'm thinking about. Like, yeah, okay, you might both be willing to at least try it a little bit. But I would think that the first tendency is to go for the comfort zone rather than for let's branch out.
Oh, well, there could be, but I want to encourage couples who have spent a lot of time in the comfort zone and things are a little bit stagnant
Hmm.
to branch out, to try and find connection and revive that connection somewhere else, doing something different. And for sure, um, what I do, my program is going to be far more appealing to foodies,
Hmm.
right? So if you get something like, my ex-husband was a very picky eater. And, if I said, I'm going to do this, he would be like, fine, that's great, but he would rarely be excited about it
Hmm.
unless it was chicken wings or something, right? So, I think that what I do is going to appeal to foodies more than it will appeal to people who really just don't care what they eat and don't have much of a passion for food.
Yeah, that's not all that far away from where I was, because when I met my ex, when we first got together, I came from a background where my mom was a really poor cook, and
Hmm.
she was the first one to admit it. I mean,
I'm so sorry. I can't imagine.
oh, it was just let's just say I got very used to overdone meat and things like that, you know. So that's the way I grew up. The first time that I actually got served something that was cooked the right amount and it was moist and tender and so forth, I thought maybe it was cooked wrong. it
You
was
didn't know any
it
better.
was not part of my experience, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. So it was actually one of the ways that my ex ended up attracting me because she could cook. I mean,
Hmm.
she was not like a five-star chef, but she could do basic cooking very very well, and she had her repertoire that worked really well. So literally, the old adage was true: the way to my heart was through my stomach, and it worked beautifully.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
So,
so I think about that situation and I say to myself, well, how could that have played out? And I don't know. I mean, maybe it could have worked with what you're talking about, but I kind of think you're maybe right. Maybe you do have to be foodie before
well,
you can get there. I don't know.
it's hard to know, right? I mean, everybody, there's however many billion people in the world, and we're all a little bit different. So what works for one doesn't work for others necessarily. But also, um, with these classes, I'm bringing recipes that I know work because
Mm,
I'm pretty fussy about that. I'm doing the shopping list. I'm more or less doing all the planning,
hmm.
and the couple only needs to show up. So nobody's feeling like, oh, I had to do all the work, or oh, I'm carrying all the responsibility. They're going in as equals. And maybe you and your ex could have flipped responsibility and see how that works if you were the boss and she was the sous chef. And maybe she would have learned along the way to bite her tongue a little bit and let you, be the boss from time to time. So I think there's all sorts of interesting options that can come into play and that can help people grow and understand. And just like anything, it's not universally for everybody, but there's a lot of people who really enjoy the cooking classes together. And yeah, I have a lady who's she's a tantra expert, and I don't know a whole lot about that stuff, but I know essentially what it is, and
Hmm.
she and her partner love doing my cooking classes. And you
Hmm.
wouldn't think she needed the opportunity to connect with her partner,
Yeah.
but they love, and she always sends me pictures of them with their food and really happy. So you never know where it's going to appeal to somebody or how it's going to appeal or who it will appeal to.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm our own case, and to be fair to my ex, if we had tried to flip the roles, I don't think she would have been the problem. I think I would have been the problem.
So, well, and it's often I think people break up for a reason, right? They're not great together. If they were great together, they probably wouldn't.
But in other ways, we were actually very, very good together. We had a lot of really, really good years together. But in the kitchen, I just had no confidence for the reason I gave. I mean, literally, I came from a background where I knew nothing about cooking, and now all of a sudden,
Right.
I'm supposed to lead. Like, yeah, you'll just scare the daylights out of me while you're at it. I would have been the deer in the headlight person in the kitchen in that circumstance. I mean, literally, it took being kicked out of the relationship to say, okay, well, I've been exposed long enough now. I've had over 20 years with my ex and seeing what she did in the kitchen, learning her stuff. I know her basics now. Maybe it's time for me to just start trying, just start experimenting with some stuff. And I have been. I've been experimenting with
Yeah.
stuff that we never even did together. So it did
Yeah.
provide that kind of foundation. But yeah, I think you have to have some kind of background like that to lean on. Otherwise, you're lost.
Or you can, that's part of what a good relationship coach can do too, is say, okay, you don't feel confident, but let's work on that confidence. How can we help you to feel more confident in the kitchen so that you can get more enjoyment out of it? I mean, there's always like one thing comes up and there's a million different paths you can do to kind of encourage it. For me, nobody ever cooks for me, as I'm sure you can imagine, right? And it's like you with your ex, people are like that with me. Very rarely do people cook for me. Sometimes they do, starting a little more now. And I always make the joke my partner plays possum because he can cook. And I always say, I know you can cook. You're just keeping it from me because I'll say something. I'll start to do something and he'll say, well, why don't you do this? And I'll go, how do you know about that? So I think he can cook quite well. And so that's part of, the fun of bringing him into the kitchen
Mm,
is because I think he likes to cook, but he felt intimidated by me. But he's getting a little bit better
hmm.
because and I have not traditionally been very good with having people in the kitchen. I'm getting better because of him.
Hmm.
And I'm pretty good at it now, but because of him. And I didn't cook with my kids a whole lot because I was a bit of a control freak. It's like that doesn't
Mm,
go in there at that time. You
hmm.
need to put right. So, so it's kind of been a learning process for me too, and learning to have him in the kitchen and just knowing how much I enjoy doing it, cooking with him and creating these things has really been a big momentum for me.
That's a really interesting point you're making because you have that background of being a cordon bleu chef. I mean, not a small task to go through that course in the first place. And when you come out the other end, you know some stuff. You know stuff that the average person has no clue about. So you know your stuff. And
Yeah.
now you have to kind of tone it down when you're working with somebody who doesn't know that stuff. I mean, that's not an easy thing to do necessarily. That's going to take some practice.
Definitely. And, I have always said that I think um, cooking, either you have the knack for cooking or you don't. And somebody who doesn't have the knack can learn to cook and can make good things, but it's never going to be as easy for that person who can just do it. And I've always been like that. My mom told me I wanted custard one time. And I said, "How do you make custard, Mom?" And I was just little. And she said, "Well, you take some egg whites and mix them with sugar and put them in warm milk and stir it till it's thick." And I went off and made custard from that was all she gave me. So it's always something that I've sort of been intuitive with. And I know a lot of people who are not trained chefs who do have that knack for cooking and can pick things up. And they will cook with me, generally not for me, but they love talking to me and say, "Okay, how do you do this? How can I make this better?" Right? So there's so many little sub layers to cooking, and it's never just you're good or you're not, or you want to or you don't. There's usually people, you know, want to acquire a little bit more. They want to grow in the kitchen, and those are the ones who are great to work with me because we just have fun doing it.
When you were talking about the sauce, you reminded me of a movie that came out a few years back called The 100-Foot Journey. Have you seen that one?
Is that the one across where the Indian restaurant across the street?
Right.
I
Yes.
forgot about that. Somebody told me about that a long time ago, and I
Yeah.
haven't seen it. Oh,
Oh,
I'm gonna
you've
have to look
got to
for that
see
now.
that one.
Yeah,
You have to see that one. It's an excellent movie, but
because they're in
especially
France,
you.
aren't they?
Yeah, they're in France,
Yeah,
right? Yeah,
yeah,
and the restaurant across the street from the Indian restaurant is a 1-star Michelin restaurant trying to get to 2 stars,
yeah.
and the lead cook for the Indian restaurant ends up going to work for the French restaurant and becomes a star, and it helps them to get their 2nd star, and ends up going to Paris and becomes this France-wide famous person because he's the one of the few who can bring down the stars, is the way that they put it. But
Oh, I remember that.
the thing that's beautiful about the story is that it illustrates, first of all, how competitive French cooking is, but it also illustrates the beauty of the relationship because he has a relationship that's building with one of the sous chefs in the French restaurant.
Hmm.
And then they split off when he goes off to Paris. And she's one of the reasons why he ends up coming back to the little town to help the restaurant reach for its 3rd star. That's how the movie ends.
Oh,
It's the
nice.
relationship that brings them back. So that's why I was thinking, oh my God, how could Krista have not seen this movie?
I remember somebody telling me about it and telling me in detail, but I didn't see it. Something, squirrel, whatever. But
Yeah.
yeah, I definitely have to see that because I remember hearing about it and it just sounded absolutely wonderful.
In fact, at one point, he makes what I don't know if this is actually true, but what in the movie they call the 4 sauces of French cuisine. And he gets one of the cookbooks from her, and then he makes them all first try perfect, and she's blown
Good to
away at
know.
how good they are.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds like it would be right up my alley. I love
Yeah.
all the food movies, right?
In fact, one of the scenes they find, I think it's mushrooms by the side of the road, and they end up incorporating it in the cooking. And of course, that becomes part of the dialogue that they found these mushrooms. And then later on, um, the young woman finds more mushrooms, but the mushrooms she finds this time are the poisonous type, and she almost
Oh,
uses the poisonous ones. And she gets stopped by the head of the restaurant, played by Helen Mirren, who does a brilliant job.
oh, I can imagine.
Oh yeah, Helen is incredible. It also has one of the best acting scenes I've ever seen. Again, performed by Helen Mirren, where the Indian boy tries out to be a chef for her restaurant. And her routine is whenever she wants to give somebody a try, she has to make her an omelet. And then she takes one bite, and then her tongue decides whether or not this person actually has a chance to be a good chef. So he he the lead up to it is that there's a subtext where the former chef working for her and some of his friends are angry that this Indian restaurant is across the way and is invading their French space and so forth, and they end up setting it on fire. And
Oh,
his hands, the young man, his hands get burned, and so he can't do any cooking. So he's directing Helen on how to make the omelet that he would be making for her.
Oh,
So
wow.
and they're doing it all with no dialogue. You just hear music and you see their reactions. You see her facial reactions, his reactions, and like for instance, he wants to put some hot pepper in, and she puts a little bit in. He says, "Oh no, all of it." She says, "Oh God." And, you just see the whole thing going on, and
Yeah.
then she finally sits down to eat it, and it is a masterful performance by a wonderful actor. She just the way she does it. She takes her bite and she sits up straight, and then she sags, and you can just tell she's defeated because they have this rivalry going on between the restaurants, and she realizes her restaurant doesn't have a prayer of a chance as long as the other restaurant has this guy as a chef. But she accomplishes all that without saying a word.
Yeah.
She does it
Amazing.
just through her body language. It's one of the best
Okay.
acting scenes I've ever seen.
I
So
have to see this
yeah,
now.
you guys see it. It's a really, really good movie. Really, really good. Yeah.
Awesome.
It also is a kind of an important illustration, though, about this idea of cooking and relationships. Because, like I said,
Hmm.
that's one of the sub themes of the movie is that there's this relationship that goes on between the young man and the sous chef. Uh, it points to the idea that, well, first of all, like you said, they're both foodies, so obviously that's going to be a major theme in their relationship, and they end up at the end partnering. They end up partnering to take over the Maison Bleu and become the people operating the thing. But the relationship piece is something that you feel like the movie introduced rather than as a story theme, rather than as an ongoing thing. Yet what we're learning here is you're recommending it as not just a good thing for a story. You're saying this is something that everybody should at least consider being doing on a regular basis. This should be part of their livelihood, not their livelihood, but their lives.
Their
Um,
lives. Yeah.
yeah.
Food is a love language, right? A lot of the senses that you use with food and cooking are the same senses that are in a relationship. The smell, they say the smell of your partner is so strong and you know invokes certain reactions in you, and the smell of the food is so important. And touching the food, feeling the textures and all of this stuff, and there's such a crossover. And so I think food can be very sexy and sensual. And
Mhm.
I think it's a great way for people to connect, to bring something romantic and special into their home, into their life, into their kitchen.
It makes a lot of sense. You mentioned scent, smell. And two thoughts came to my mind. First, smell is the only one of the five senses that bypasses what they call the reticular activating system in the back of the head, meaning that's the filtration system. That's the system that decides whether or not your conscious mind is going to be allowed to focus on something. Scent,
Hmm.
smell bypasses that. So I think that's one of the reasons why smell is such a potent factor in romance, because it bypasses the conscious mind. It bypasses all defenses. It just penetrates.
And how often can a scent take you right back to a certain time and place, right?
Yes, yes. By the way,
So,
that's also, by the way, a dialogue theme from the movie. Just saying.
okay. See, there you go. I knew I was doing it. I didn't even know I was doing
That's right. That's right. Yeah, but it's true. It's true.
it.
And in fact, that whole thing about smell is that it's kind of a way of helping us to make the food more potent, more a bigger experience, I guess is what I'm trying to say. In fact, that was, again, going back to the movie, that was one of the things that was big about that movie. I saw, they have the making of, when back, this is back when they had the DVDs, you could watch the making of, the movie, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And they were talking about how, since it's a movie where it's about food and you can't actually eat or smell the food, they had to present it in a way that it would have a sensual delight on screen, which means you have to do it visually. So they spent a lot of time making all the food absolutely pristinely, perfectly looking, and so forth. They had, like, reams of chefs
Yeah.
on set trying to make everything just perfect and so forth. And the actors were commenting about how hard it was to be standing there and doing their lines and pretending that the food was food they were actually going to eat when they knew that they couldn't eat it. Like,
Right.
it was a temptation that was right in front of them.
Yeah. Well, there's this guy on Instagram, Cedric Lorenzen. And he's like, my daughter knows about him. I asked her, I said, somebody told me about it. And he's very much, he's this good looking Italian guy. Most of the time he cooks with no shirt on, but
Yeah.
he makes amazingly beautiful things.
Mm.
And like, it's an Instagram reel, so it's very short,
Hmm.
but he pulls, the sensual into it, the way he licks his fingers and the way
Hmm.
he touches things.
Sure.
And I'm sure every woman on the planet is looking at those going, "Oh, I really like that." But he's done that. He's done that with pictures because, and I've watched him. This guy is really good. And the things that he shows, the pictures and the way he creates it, you can practically taste it. Like, you
Mm.
can look at it and go, this is incredible what this guy is doing.
Hmm.
And it's all edited because everything is perfect,
Hmm.
right? The food comes out perfectly, and food doesn't always come out perfectly.
No.
So I'm sure it's edited, but his videos are just beautiful, the food. And it's a very basic kitchen with a big stainless steel countertop, and I think a black background. And mostly all you see is this one bit of countertop.
Oh no. We just lost Krista again. This seems to be our day for technical difficulties. First Anne Marie with her internet outage due to the storm, and now twice in one show, Krista is unable to continue talking, and she just blanked right out. I don't know what that is. It almost seems like she ran out of battery or something. I'm not quite sure what that was, but hopefully she'll be rejoining us in just a minute. So, all right. Well, while she's doing that, let's see what else shall I tell you about. I told you about what's coming tomorrow. Oh, here she comes again. Good. Let's see if I can bring her back onto the stage. There we go.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Woo! I can hear you. Perfect.
Hooray! We're back. Okay. It's like I was saying while we were waiting for you to reconnect. This seems to be one of those days for technical difficulties because Anne Marie couldn't connect because she has no internet due to a storm, and then here we are twice in one episode. You're getting knocked out. So if nothing else, it means that the energy of the show is so high that we're killing off technology. Yeah.
I love that. Well, my son tried to call, and of course, call once, and I deleted it, and that means immediately call back.
Of course,
So,
yes, right.
right, couldn't possibly mean that mom is busy.
No,
So,
no.
but anyways, for whatever reason, that made the sound go wonky. So I apologize.
That's all right. No big deal on that. Something you were saying before the sound went wonky and we lost you for a minute there. I'm trying to remember exactly what it was. Oh, I know. You mentioned how food doesn't always come out right. And it occurred to me that's actually perhaps one of the reasons why people might not feel comfortable with the idea of trying to connect a relationship in the kitchen because, well, what if the food doesn't come out right?
I think there's almost as much fun in the failures as there are in the successes, right? Because you can put your effort into it and do it, and then at the end, you know, quite often it's not going to look exactly what I make, just
Hmm.
because I've done it 25 times and this is your first time.
Hmm.
And so, sometimes the fun is looking at it and going, "Oh man, that looks terrible, but it tastes really good," right? And I'm
Right.
can virtually guarantee it's going to taste good because, I'm going to walk you through step by step. But sometimes that's the fun part is in the mistakes, and we learn so much more, no, not so much more, but we learn through our failures just as much as we learn through our successes, right?
More so,
And
I would say. Yeah.
right. And so I think that's fun, to see at the end. It's like, we really thought this was going to turn out better, and you laugh about it, and you understand that you've done something together, and you have learned a new skill because the next time it will look better, and it's just part of the enjoyment.
I don't remember what the dish was, but I remember it was some kind of a pasta dish that I was trying to make, and I didn't have mozzarella cheese. Oh, we just lost Krista again. Looks like she's got another phone call coming through. Well, I'll tell my story, and that'll keep us going until she is able to reconnect. But like I was saying, there was a dish I was making. I think it was an Italian dish. I can't remember exactly what it was. Probably just uh, a basic noodles sauce meat of some kind and a mozzarella cheese and some spicing. But in the midst of making it, I realized I didn't have any mozzarella cheese. So what am I going to do? And so I looked and I said, okay, here she comes again. All right.
Third time's the charm for my son, apparently.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I
Like
delegated.
yep. Okay, I got it. So I'll reiterate the story I was starting to tell because I need to bring you in on it. So, like I said, there was a meal I was making within the last 3 or 4 months where I didn't have all the ingredients. I think I was just making kind of a basic pasta sauce, meat, mozzarella cheese, that kind of thing with some spicing, and I didn't have any mozzarella cheese. I'm in the middle of making this thing. Well, there's no cheese. What am I going to do? I look in the fridge and I have cottage cheese. I said, can you use cottage cheese for this? So I go on the internet, look it up. Well, yeah, you can. You just have to make sure you don't have too much moisture in there. I said, okay, how much is too much? I don't know. Let's try it. And so I figured, well, I'll put it in the oven. That way, that the heat perhaps will help evaporate. Maybe that'll help take care of it. And so I put it in the oven, took it out later, and it was a mush. So I was like, well, that didn't quite work.
Well, but did it taste okay?
It tasted okay. Yeah. Yeah. It just looked wrong.
Yeah,
And it was a little
exactly.
bit moist. It was a little bit wet.
Yeah. Well, and who doesn't like to add that word into conversations when you're having a romantic evening anyways, right? But no, it's certainly learning the art of improvisation and adapting is fun in the kitchen too. And, this is the more you grow because I might say, okay, tonight we're going to create this dish and we're going to put this, that, and the other thing in it. And, one couple may make it and say, that was good, except I really don't like the peppers. I think I would like asparagus instead, right? And then they can either experiment and create it next time and do it a little different, or they pop me a message and say, hey, could we substitute this next time? So, there's little, like I said earlier, a million different directions and ways to grow and adapt and improvise and change and learn from these things.
Well, if you're in the mood to be changing or not to be adapting to experimenting, I guess is the word I'm looking for. If you're in the mood to experiment, that's going to help you a lot. Let's say you are in the mood to experiment. Let's say you're willing to give it a shot and it doesn't really come out the way you wanted it to. If you're trying to do it as a partnership, among other things, at least it gives you the opportunity to laugh at it. Now, I'm not saying everybody's going to laugh. Some people are perhaps going to take it too seriously, and maybe that's
Right.
kind of what you try to redirect people away from. But it is an opportunity to laugh.
It definitely is, and all of these little bits of conversation, I think, are why I want people to do it, is to have the fun, to laugh at your mistakes, to throw the flour on, not handfuls, but a little flick of flour or whatever, right? I mean, what I really want to encourage people to do is have fun and make it playful so that it is a relaxing time together and not a super serious, like, okay, Gordon Ramsay's going to be looking at this. It's got to be
Oh
perfect. We don't
God.
want that. We just want to have fun and create something together. And a lot of what we're creating is the connection and the time together.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. I don't want to have Gordon Ramsay involved at all in that conversation.
No.
No, not unless you want to absolutely ruin the experience. Which, by the way, that would do a very nice job of. But
Oh, he
that's
would be fabulous at ruining it. But yeah.
I'm also curious to know when you're advocating, working not advocating, but when you're actually working with your clients and you're helping them learn. I presume what you're doing is you're presenting a recipe, teaching them a recipe that they can learn to add to their repertoire and so forth. But
Yep.
when you're guiding them through that process, are you doing it with the idea, okay, here's a recipe that you can put into your cookbook, or are you doing it with the idea, here's a way to try something you haven't tried before, and it doesn't matter whether you use this recipe or not?
Um, I guess maybe a little bit of both. Like I said, cooking isn't necessarily the entire focus, but I very much want cooking to be something that is another benefit to what they're doing,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I want them to cook together and have the conversation and create a nice meal, but I also want to add value to it by giving them some tips to make a new recipe that they put in their repertoire because even me, I'm always looking for new recipes. And, I find funniest thing is I'll make something, on a somewhat regular basis for a year, and then I forget about it for 3 years, and then it's like, oh, I haven't made this for so long, right? And but in between there, I've been scratching my head thinking, oh, what am I going to make? And that's the question for me every single day is, what am I going to make for dinner? And sometimes my partner comes home and I say to him, yeah, I haven't even given any thought to dinner yet. I've got a chicken breast, you know. So the
That's
more
the way it starts.
yeah. And so the more recipes you have, the easier it is when you're making these decisions on a day-to-day basis.
Now, I have to say, what saved me after my divorce was the internet,
Right.
specifically artificial intelligence. I love
Okay.
using AI. My favorite is ChatGPT, the famous one.
Yep.
But I love using AI by saying, I need a recipe. I need a chicken recipe, and I can't think of anything. Give me 5 chicken recipes that are all different, that are all really tasty, and it'll give me
Yeah.
5 instantly, like within seconds. It'll give me 5 recipes, and that looks good, that kind of. So I don't even have to think about it. If I really I'm without an idea, I'll just ask the AI to give me some ideas, and it'll give me. Usually, it also tends to draw from like specific um, cuisine type areas. Like
Okay.
it'll make a Mediterranean offering, and it'll make a Southwestern offering, and an Italian offering, and maybe a Vietnamese. It'll do that kind
Yep.
of a thing, and it'll draw one from each one of them.
I have never thought of using AI to help plan meals, but I mean, it makes sense. The only issue that I have with finding recipes online, and don't get me wrong, I look for a lot of recipes online. I made one last night, a local um, East Coast Canadian dessert, and I Googled it because I couldn't find it in any of my cookbooks. But is a lot of times when I look at a recipe, I can look at it and say, that's not going to work.
It's not going to work. Yeah.
And I don't mean that's not going to work for me. I mean, that's not going to
For
set up the
anybody.
way they told it to,
Yeah.
right? So when I'm looking for recipes, a lot of what I'm doing is I'm just pulling the pieces that I want out and then
Mm.
applying them to what I know and believe will work. Because like I said, one of the things that's really important to me when I'm teaching people and doing these classes is that it has to be something that's possible to replicate. I don't want something that I can do because I'm a cordon bleu chef and they're going to fail miserably.
Hmm.
People will make mistakes. Things might not turn out perfectly, but for the most part, I want people to be able to replicate what it is that I'm showing them.
Which raises an interesting question, which is typically when you work with a recipe, the recipe tells you, 1/4 teaspoon of this, 1/3 teaspoon of that, and all that kind of stuff. At what point do you advocate, oh, just screw the number of teaspoons, just, pour some of this, pour some of that?
That's how I do all my cooking. And
Sure,
so
you
what,
do, but I mean, for the average person who you're, for the average couple that you're trying to teach this to, at what point do you say, yeah, go ahead, open up, go for it?
well, they have to have a fairly good sense of what they're doing, and they have to have some kitchen skills to be able to do that. And of course, with baking, never wing baking. It's science. You have to do it the way you're supposed to do it. But I think there's a lot of flexibility. And so I encourage people in classes, I'll say, if you like a little more cilantro in this, or you like a little less cilantro, then adapt it. Don't leave it out because it's not going to taste the same type of thing, right? So I do try to encourage people to personalize recipes by giving them tips as I go, saying, this can be tweaked, that can be tweaked, that needs to be what it is.
Hmm. Hmm. I just know from my own experience that when I have allowed myself to do that, now I also have to give myself some grace because it's not going to come out exactly the way that the recipe said it was supposed to come out.
Yeah.
But if I'm willing to give myself that grace, especially if I'm feeling pressed that day because I'm just cooking for myself, I'm not cooking as part of a couple, right? If I just allow myself, like I want to do something with some kind of a Southwestern theme, so I'll grab some cumin, I'll grab some chili powder, I'll grab some onion powder, just the basic stuff that you put into it, and I'll just say, oh, just some of this, some of this, and it comes out pretty good. Not great.
Yeah.
It's not matching perfectly. That's what I mean when I say I have to give myself some grace. Like, how far away from the ideal am I willing to be? And for me, well, partly because I grew up with a mom who couldn't cook, I'm willing to go a long way away from ideal. Not so much true, perhaps, for other people, but that's why I say it depends on how much grace you're willing to give yourself.
But I think that's exactly right. Is your experience and the way you felt doing it with your ex is it was a fear of failure. And I
Hmm.
think that's what holds people back from experimenting a little bit. And so, I encourage people to address that fear of failure and say, okay, what's the worst that's going to happen? I'm not going to make pasta and put 4 tablespoons of salt. That's not the kind of improvising we're talking about, right? Assuming people are improvising, saying, okay, I'm going to throw mushrooms into my smoked salmon pasta, which may or may not be good. It's not going to be awful, like you said. There's wiggle room, but experiment to find what you like and to tweak recipes to be your very own rather than just following what people give you. So I think experimentation is great. And using a little bit of common sense, like I said, not using 4 tablespoons of salt as your experiment, keep it within reason. It's usually these things will yield something that's maybe not perfect, but interesting enough that you think, okay, next time if I do this, it's going to be great.
Well, actually, you mentioned salt. That was something I was trying to not use. I was trying to cut down on that dramatically. So I was cutting down dramatically, and I've actually gotten to the point now where if the recipe calls for salt, I don't even add it anymore. And I mean, I don't know how many rules I'm breaking when I do that, but it doesn't seem to come out any worse. It actually comes out pretty good that way because
Well,
there's salt in other foods. I mean, there's salt in cheeses, there's salt in a variety of different things. It's not like there's no salt. It's just that I'm not adding the salt.
right. And it depends on what you're doing, right? Like if you make rice and you don't put any salt, no chicken stock, it's just water and rice, it's going to be pretty bland.
That's going to be bland, sure, yeah.
If you're doing a stir fry with soy sauce and all that
Oh
stuff,
yeah,
you
there's a
might
ton of
not
sodium in
notice
there.
that your rice is bland, right?
Yeah,
So there's definitely wiggle room. I will tell you a funny thing about salt. When I was at school in France, the French, you wouldn't believe how much salt they put in their food.
really.
And I do it too. Not with everything, but when it's important cooking, I will put a lot of salt in. And I remember when the chefs were doing it and us as newbies watching them were just like, oh my God, that's going to be inedible. And it never was. Not once. But we'd be gasping at the amount of salt they would put in. And it was never, ever once was it oversalted. So
That's
it's kind of interesting the threshold for salt. And then
yeah,
another little salt anecdote is in a lot of restaurants, instead of using salt on the stove, like when they're cooking on the line, they'll use, that bright yellow chicken stock powder.
right, yeah.
They use that instead because it's pretty much impossible to oversalt your dish if you're using chicken stock instead of salt.
Okay, that
So
makes sense.
nobody's going to send it back. No new chef is going to ruin something with too much salt. So they use the chicken stock powder.
Yeah, I always had the theory that if there was a restaurant where there was too much salt in the food, it was because the chef was a smoker and he couldn't tell the difference anymore.
Well, there's that too, for sure.
I mean,
Yeah.
I'm just guessing, but that was
Yeah.
always my excuse for him. Otherwise, I had to just start cursing at him. I didn't want to do that, so I figured, I'll just say he's a smoker. Make it easy.
You always know when somebody is a smoker because they start seasoning your food without even tasting it. It's like, which you're never supposed to do. That's a big no-no in front of a chef is to season it without even tasting it.
Yeah, okay, all right,
It shows a lack of confidence in their creations.
very interesting.
Yeah.
This has been a fun conversation. Now, we didn't really talk about your cooking class, though. So tell us a little bit about that and how people can find out more about it.
Well, I have a cooking class coming up on Thursday, and it's just a fun, simple summer supper type thing. We're going to be making a chimichurri steak and my signature orzo salad, which is so yummy. And I think I'm going to do a little cucumber salad in with that too. So it's just easy summer cooking. Um, the sign up is my website is Krista-Marie, Krista-Marie.com/chef's kiss, all one word.
Okay, so for those who are lucky enough to actually hear this recipe yeah, to hear this episode within the next day or two, we'll include the link in there. But for those who catch this later on, which is usually the case, how can they reach out to you? I mean, I presume you do courses fairly regularly. How do they find out about that?
Well, the Krista-Marie.com Chef's Kiss is the ongoing site for all of my cooking classes.
Oh, it is.
I just updated as the cooking class
Oh, okay.
changes to the new one. And my signature program is Bistro Chez Vous, and that's sort of years worth of cooking classes where I really curate a special evening more than just, the cooking class with a simple meal. It's a little more in depth, a little more cooking skills, a little more conversation points, all that type of thing.
And how does this work? I mean, obviously, you're trying to get people to be taking your class as a couple because
Mhm.
this is about relationship cooking. So, are you doing this live by video? Is that what you're doing?
Yep, I do it in a Zoom.
Hmm.
And of course, the replay is always available, right? Because in
Hmm.
this world, everybody on the interweb is in different time zones.
Oh, of course.
So I do it at 6 p.m. Eastern time, which is 7 p.m. my time.
Hmm.
Um, and that's going to work for a small portion of people. So I always have the replay available. So if you sign up, the replay will be mailed to you after the fact so that you always have access to the recipe.
Okay, very cool. I love it. One final question, too. People who have questions. In other words, I mean, because you're an expert, right? You're a
Yep.
Cordon chef. They want to know the answer to this particular question that has been haunting them about that recipe or something like that. How do they find you? How do they reach you?
The best way is I always direct people to my Facebook profile, which is just my
Mhm.
name, Krista Melanson, because then people can see who I am and see that I'm a real person and sort of get to know me a little bit through that. And of course, once you found me on Facebook, then you have access to my entire life. So
Ah, be forewarned.
be forewarned. But you know what? My profile is not, I mean, there's obviously a whole lot about cooking, a lot about traveling, because I have a little issue with travel. I travel a
Uh-huh,
lot.
uh-huh.
And,
Well, there are
but,
worse issues.
oh, well, exactly right. But there's not a lot of businessy things on my profile. Obviously, my link is there, but it's not like I'm flogging what I do on my profile all the time. It's just a little slice of me.
Okay, really good. I love it. One last thing that I want to do before we part company for the day. I've been doing this for the last couple of years. The podcast I've been doing for 12 years, but this one piece I've been doing for about 2 years now. I noticed a couple of years ago that with all the guests coming onto the program and times when I appear on other people's programs and so forth, plus like you were mentioning the social media, the Facebook, the sharing of stuff there and all the different other social medias and the blogging and vlogging and everything else. There's all this content that people are putting out and it's being consumed by other people they've never met, never been seen, never will meet, never will see. And they're helping them and they never find out about it and they never get thanked for it. And I said, well, we can do something about that. So what I'd like to do is to say on behalf of those people you've never met, you've never
Mhm.
seen, never will meet, never will see, who've been consuming your content, picking up your tips, trying out your recipes, on their behalf, thank you. Thank you for what you're doing because you're making a difference in this world.
Oh, that's so sweet. Thank you. You're right. It does happen. And, I like doing it because I like helping people. But
Mhm.
yeah, it's nice sometimes to be reminded that I am helping people.
Well, it's easy to forget. I mean, we live in the content generation age, and so we kind of dismiss it like it's not important, but it is important.
Yeah, for sure.
It really is. So, and it's also important to have these conversations too. I really appreciate the one we've been having. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you. Great conversation, Walt. I really appreciate it. It was lovely to meet you.
Lovely to meet you too. And thank you to our podcast listeners everywhere. We'll see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.